Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to 30 on Thursdays, SusQtech's bi-weekly 30-minute SharePoint webinar series. For those of you joining us for the first time, a little bit about 30 on Thursdays. As I mentioned, it's a bi-weekly 30-minute webinar held every other Thursday at 1:30. Try to keep the format to a half hour. Covering anything and everything related to SharePoint. Our next webinar is coming up September 6th. That topic is metadata versus folders, the age-old debate within SharePoint. You can register for that event as well as get our full schedule at susqtech.com/webinars. Today's session is being recorded. You will be able to access that through susqtech.com/archive webinars. And there we have a whole slew of past 30 on Thursdays, ranging from everything into design to 508 compliance. All those type of things are located on susqtech.com/archive webinars. As we go through the session today, if you have questions for Randy or myself, go ahead and use the question window located to the right-hand side, typically on most monitors on the right-hand side within GoToWebinar. And we'll hold those questions till the end, but please submit your questions as we go. Also, one other thing that we have coming up, another webinar you may be interested in. This is not really a webinar, but it's a 3-hour training course. It's a developer crash course with Liam Cleary, one of our MVPs here at SusQtech. It's on authentication, authorization, and security. So it's a pretty dev-heavy topic, but if you're interested, you can get more information on that on susqtech.com, as well as some of these past 3-hour format webinars we've been doing, whether it be responsive design for SharePoint, BI for SharePoint, or no-code solutions in SharePoint. So with that, I'd like to get into today's topic, which is governance automation in SharePoint. Our presenter today is Randy Williams. He's a SharePoint MVP from AvePoint. He'll talk a little bit more about himself. This is the second time we've had Randy with us. He talked about, he did kind of a 30-minute run-through of governance as a whole back in March of this year. And this is kind of a follow-up to that, talk about some of the exciting things AvePoint's doing in and around governance in SharePoint. And lastly, I'm Steve Witt, Vice President of Training and Product Development here at SusQtech, and I'll be the moderator today. So with that, let's get started. Randy, I will go ahead and make you the presenter.
Okay, very good. Thank you so much, Steve. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for joining us on our talk this morning or this afternoon, depending on where you're located. Let me go ahead and just get my slide presenting ready to go, and hopefully we'll have all my presentations ready to go. I've also got a demo that I want to walk through. Okay, so can you guys see that? I want to make sure that you guys can kind of get through all that okay.
Yep, looks good to me, Randy.
Okay, very good. All right, so again, welcome to our session. So I'm going to be talking a little bit about governance. Might be a little bit of a recap for those of you that joined us in our session on this back in March, as Steve alluded to, but kind of focus a little bit more on the automation aspect and how you can enforce governance through SharePoint. So let's go ahead and get started here. Got a lot to talk about, so I'm not going to get in too much of myself, but I've been working with SharePoint now for really since it came out in its very first incarnations in 2001, and been working in technology really much longer than that. I've been a SharePoint MVP for a few years, based in California, done a lot of writing, et cetera, et cetera. But maybe most importantly, if you'd like to continue our conversation after our session today, feel free to reach out to me. You've got my email address on the screen there, randy.williams@avepoint.com. You can also find me on Twitter. And 2 of my more recent books are there on the screen. Okay, so just very quickly here, SharePoint governance. Let's make sure we're all clear on what governance is. And there are lots of definitions for this, I fully acknowledge. Here's one of the ones that I've been using recently. It's one of the ones that Microsoft promotes. Some of the essential points on this that I want to kind of illustrate is that, well, in many cases we think of governance as being something sort of government-related, all about policies and procedures, and perhaps what you might have considered bureaucratic red tape. The reality is it's really more about guiding and cooperation, providing essentially the steps that are needed to be able to use a platform in a way that can achieve long-term business value. So when we think about SharePoint, what are the kinds of things that the organization should be doing to use SharePoint effectively? So it's not so much on how to use the product in a generic way. It's more about how is the organization going to be using that product to fulfill their information management and knowledge management requirements. Okay, and governance, it does involve a number of different areas, and certainly it all starts at the top level from a corporate governance point of view, which then kind of filters down into an IT governance, which is system governance, and sort of not to belittle it, but SharePoint governance is really, a small part of a much larger spectrum of governance that exists within the organization. I mention that for two reasons. One, because people in many cases try to start with SharePoint governance first without having these sort of other layers. And secondly, the problem that then results with that is there's oftentimes misalignment between what SharePoint is doing and not being positioned in a way that supports the long-term objectives of the organization. So I'm a very big advocate on having alignment between what the corporate governance and the sort of strategic vision of the organization is, and having SharePoint then support that as an initiative. All right, now in terms of how much governance is needed, this is going to vary widely, but hopefully this gives you a little bit of an idea of how that works across the different types of workloads that many people use SharePoint for. So as you tend to publish information to a wider audience, as you get to, let's say, the community sites and the portal sites, that exposure and that sort of publishing size is going to require a little bit more in terms of the actual governance needed. And as you're looking towards the sort of lower end, anything that'd be more personal nature, let's say my sites or very, very small team sites, typically the governance on that is much less, largely because, again, the audience size is much more narrowed. So just recognize that governance is not the same thing for all different things that you use SharePoint for. It will vary among the different workloads that you use it. And in many cases, it is about striking a balance. It's recognizing what the business is trying to do and where it's trying to go. It's what is technically available with the solution and combining it with third-party products and all the training that's been done on the technical side. There's always a bit of a careful balance and sometimes difficult trade-off decisions that have to be made. Okay, and then in terms of the requirements for IT governance, this is one of the other ways that I often position governance. It's really kind of four centralized components all sort of interworking together as a series of parts: people, policy, process, and technology. So all four of these kind of work together to help drive this governance machine within an organization. All right, now when we think about the policies, and this is going to be for the most part SharePoint specific, what we're oftentimes looking at are a number of different areas that cover infrastructure, which could be servers, it could be storage, it could be some of the other systems that are in place, information architecture in SharePoint, which, as I often like to describe, is really just your way of describing and organizing content. But equally important, as you kind of drill down into it, some of the sort of information management, project management areas as well. This is where more of the policy tends to come in. Leadership becomes an important element in terms of not only getting sponsorship, but kind of driving how the project is going to be going forward. And then that's going to affect user adoption and culture and this sort of continuous improvement goal. There's just a number of different elements that you typically think of. And when we start thinking about the categories, I'm trying to lead us into a discussion on what governance automation can be. These are the different areas within the organizations you're thinking about. And the kind of the key takeaway I want to make sure you recognize is this is not a technology-focused initiative. This is about using technology to align and deliver true business value across the organization. Okay, now when you think about how that policy enforcement can be done, there are a few areas that I'm just going to kind of break out here very quickly. On the far left, thinking specifically about the enforcement dilemma, you've got manual enforcement that in many cases is something that is not done just because of the effort involved and the kind of typical day-to-day, I would say, reactive mode that most of my customers are under. So here's a very small example where on the manual automation front where you could have some challenges. A real story, one of my customers was putting up a SharePoint portal, and this was actually used as an extranet, so some of that information was published to external people, and they wanted to make sure from a legal standpoint that all of that content was approved by the legal department. And that's a great idea, and that was what was actually put in place for about 3 months. And then they realized that, they weren't getting any fresh content that was published because the legal team was just already way too busy and didn't have time to approve any of that content, or, didn't have time to approve much of that content. So as you're looking towards the manual, you do have to make sure that you've got the roles and the availability of these resources that can make sure that that manual enforcement is something that really does take place. But the goal, where possible and when possible, is to try to work towards semi-automated and automated procedures. As you're looking at semi-automated, those are some of the things that our existing DocApp 6 platform can do today. So automating some of the administrative challenges with permissions, possibly handling some of the audit requirements, doing some reporting, those things. And certainly with PowerShell and even with some custom code, there's some things of that nature you can do as well. As you work towards the automated side, the goal is to try to enforce this governance policy and procedures and guidance in a way that requires very little manual intervention, very little kind of human, there's not much of a human element to that. And in many cases, you actually can use the logical architecture of SharePoint. And to be clear, what I'm referring to are using your farms and your web applications and your site collections and all of these sort of free policy enforcement things that SharePoint gives you. For example, at a web application level, you can enforce what the maximum upload size is and what file types are allowed. Within a site collection, you can enforce what the security policies are and what SharePoint groups are going to be allowed and things of that nature. So your logical architecture is definitely something you want to take advantage of when you're enforcing your policy. And that being said, you do need to make sure that you understand what your governance requirements are when you start to build that architecture so that those can, as we've talked about before, be in alignment. So for example, are you going to need multiple web applications or multiple site collections to be able to deliver different workloads? In some cases, custom applications that you end up writing, or possibly custom applications that you're going to outsource and have those custom solutions be developed and delivered into your environment. And there are a number of third-party tools. We're here to talk about governance automation in this particular session. And what we're going to see is, as we get into the second half of my talk and more around the demo, how that approach can be used to solve a number of the more challenging, more time-consuming enforcement things, but again, once it's set up in a way that's totally automated. All right, now I'm going to very quickly flip through these for sake of time. We've got lots of things to cover. But before you start your governance planning and kind of implementation, there are a few questions that you do want to ask across a number of different areas. And so one is going to be of an accountability nature. Who is going to be responsible in owning some of this content? Who will be the sort of data steward for making sure it's created and maintained and disposed of in a proper way? Typically, that person is also involved in quality. How can you make sure that active projects are going to contain the right information and defunct projects, projects that have already closed and completed out, there's some type of disposal process for making sure those can get recycled out of the system. As you're looking towards security, certainly from a compliance point of view, you do want to make sure that you're protecting content and only providing the right access to the right people. So who is going to be doing that, and what is the guidance around how that should work? So for example, at what levels do you want to allow people to break inheritance? And should permissions be granted through SharePoint groups and Active Directory groups? This is the essential guidance that the users desperately need today, so that they're doing things in a way that is sustainable and is going to make sure it complies with the policies that you've developed. Making sure that there's an appropriateness to all content. Making sure that you're not putting in sensitive information, maybe social security numbers or credit card information. Making sure that that content is going to be socially acceptable. I mean, let's face it. There have been some situations where some very inappropriate pictures or other content has been found that needs to be managed. And so, again, this a lot of times goes back to accountability. Who is the person that's responsible for that and going to maintain the integrity of that information? And can that information be found? Is it discoverable? Is it findable, as we like to say? Touched already on compliance. That hits a number of different areas. Some of these are required from a regulation point of view. Maybe it's Sarbanes-Oxley or HIPAA or some of the areas of that nature, possibly Section 508 from an accessibility point of view. making sure that the site that you made available is able to be used by people that might have, let's say, some visual impairments or other kinds of accessibility problems. And training, a huge part of what your governance initiative should be. In short, about the only thing that I want to say on this for lack of time is make sure that the training that you will be doing is going to focus on not the specific product, or in this case, SharePoint as a technology, but rather focus on how SharePoint should be used across the organization. So you're not doing product-specific training. In fact, you're doing training on the governance strategy that is then put forth. Again, that is the essential guidance that provides the users the necessary steps on how to do things properly. And certainly from an infrastructure point of view, this is part of the technology component in terms of servers and storage and all of the kind of technical service level agreements, qualities of service that go into your delivery. All right, so let's then go ahead and transition now into governance automation. I want to give you guys an idea on how some of these elements work. So this is a new product that we've developed. It's actually been out for a couple of months now, and we announced it as a concept at last year's SharePoint conference. But we're continuing to evolve this and grow this over time. So you're going to get a bit of an idea where it is today. I'm going to give you a demo, and we'll talk a little bit more about where it's going tomorrow. But first off, why is governance automation a big deal? Why have we made this investment in this product? Is to recognize that governance and the enforcement of governance is a big problem in organizations. And SharePoint, is as great of a product as it is, there's just too many limitations in terms of how elements of this can be effectively managed in a timely way across the company. And so we've taken experience from literally our 10,000 plus customers, trying to encourage people to be more sensitive to the types of custom code that they write, trying to minimize that investment of writing custom code and the challenges that brings with maintenance and upgradability, and also trying to take advantage of our governance elements that we've had in our software platform for the last 10 plus years. So a little more on that as we get further into this. So what exactly is governance automation doing? Well, from a high level, and this is really one of the big strategic changes we're making with this product, is to recognize that our tools need to be much more business-centric. In other words, we need to give the users, the end users, the ability to take advantage of some of the technology that up until prior to governance automation has been more or less locked into the hands of an IT admin. So we're basically making available this concept of a service catalog, which I sometimes like to describe as really just a menu of all these different service requests that a user can request themselves. So they might want to request, let's say, a site restore. They might want to request a permissions change, or they might want to request the provisioning of a new site or a new site collection, something I'll demonstrate later. But so not only have the service catalog, you have all of the reporting that's going to go in on the usage of this information, which might be useful from a chargeback point of view, and then also all the policies that describe how this service catalog is going to be made available. I'm going to talk more about that in a moment. And that's part of where this configuration comes in. What are the approval processes, for example, that are necessary? So Dylan, one of the users that I'll talk about in a moment, is going to be creating a new site collection. Who are the people that have to approve that? And what are the kinds of boundaries or parameters around how that site collection can be provisioned? What kinds of things are going to be allowed, for example, in terms of sizing, auditing, and whether SharePoint Designer, for example, is even going to be allowed. So a lot of that will go into the creation of your policies and your service catalog that can then be consumed by the users. And then just to point out that this really does sit as a layer on top of our platform of technology, which covers all kinds of different areas, from reporting to optimization of storage to security protection. And so what we've actually done, this is a major investment we've made in .NET version 6, which came out late last year, is to wrap that sort of core technology in a set of APIs. Effectively a set of web services that now exposes that infrastructure to external systems. So that allows our partners and our customers to actually take advantage of the sort of inner workings of it. And we've in fact taken advantage of that ourselves through what governance automation is doing. So when a new site collection, for example, is provisioned, I can be very clear on how the storage on that's going to be optimized, Who has control of that from a management point of view? How is that information going to be reported on in terms of usage? How is the life cycle of that going to be preserved and maintained from, let's say, an archiving point of view? So governance automation, to me, is really a sort of great proof that having an API to expose this kind of very, very rich and powerful back-end technology that DocApp has exposed. So that is at least sort of architecturally what governance automation does and how it sits on the stack of other systems. Okay, so in terms of service catalogs, just to give you a kind of an idea of the things that we are doing and looking towards providing, these are the kinds of menu items, again, that we want to provide to the business. So if they need to be able to grant and revoke permissions, we're providing very clear ways on how that can be done. If they need to recover a site or a library, if they need to deploy, let's say, some artifacts, maybe in a sandbox solution, or as we've been talking about, provisioning a site collection. How does that get requested, and what kinds of site templates are allowed, and what kind of quotas should be enforced? So the idea is you're basically giving users the power to perform all these operations through a service catalog interface, but not giving them all the technical permissions in SharePoint. So they're not going into central administration, for example, and creating a site collection. The system does that for them. But the users can request everything that they're looking for that's been described in the service catalog, and then once approval has been made, those provisioning steps are done in an automated way, and we'll demonstrate that. Okay, and then what we're starting to see, although this is a bit of more of a long-term roadmap that we expect some of our customers to go through, is how they can break the service offering up into different types of qualities of service, or really just different service level agreements. So, you might see some of the larger organizations looking to provide different qualities of service in terms of gold, silver versus bronze, where you have different capabilities in terms of backup and archive and permissions and things of that like. So this is kind of where we see things going long term as you try to enhance and enrich the service offering and making that service offering more flexible to the different types of users. Now, in many cases, we agree that this is probably part of a chargeback mechanism where IT will, in fact, be providing this type of service for a cost to the business. Okay, and here are some of the more SharePoint-specific elements that you might have in terms of whether you get your own unique content database and quota limits, SharePoint designer settings, just a few of the things that you have control over when you build your service catalog. Okay, and so that kind of gives you an idea, just a little bit more on how these services, this service catalog can be created and provided to a certain business unit. I'm going to talk more about this in my demo. Okay, so with that, kind of spoken to a lot of slides very, very quickly, but I did that because I wanted to give you a chance to see governance automation in action. And so let me go ahead and break from my slides, and let me flip over into my governance automation interface. And let me just kind of resize some things, move some things around here. So what I'm looking at right now is governance automation from an end user point of view. So I've currently logged into the system as a fellow by the name of Dylan. And so Dylan works in the engineering department in this particular company. And here is his interface into governance automation. Very clean, very simple. At the bottom, we have a bit of a dashboard in terms of the requests that he has made and any open tasks that he has. So if Dylan, for example, has to approve other people's requests, that may show up as an open task. But let's go ahead and real quickly just walk through a new service request. Now, we've intentionally kept this fairly simple, in part for sake of time, but in part just to kind of show you some of the key features. So as I mentioned, Dylan is in the engineering group. So these are the different service requests that we've made available to him. So there are many, many others that are available. So these are the ones that we've made available. This is his catalog. It's his menu, as we talked about earlier. So maybe we're going to create a new project site. So let's say Dylan is going to be the lead of a new project that's going to be kicked off. And so that's going to be a new project site collection. So some of the basic information that needs to be collected from Dylan. Again, Dylan is not a tech, right? He's just some guy in the business trying to get his project kicked off. And so let's go ahead and fill in some information here. Just keep it very simple here. We'll say that's a project called Project Foo. And you'll notice that I actually, as a user, cannot change where that site collection is going to go. the managed path and the web application URL is predetermined for me. That's part of what goes into creation of those policies and the service catalog itself. Okay, so just giving some basic information here. And it's a wizard, so let's just continue on, go to the next step. These are the templates that we've made available in this particular catalog, in this definition. So it's just a few, but you can include any number that you'd like. In our case, we'll just stay with team site. If you want to change any of the permissions, those of you that are familiar with SharePoint groups would recognize the owners, members, and visitors groups that get created. So Dylan can adjust these as needed. In our case, it's okay as is. Give that a moment. I think a duplicate there. Okay. Continuing on into our next step, we're going to define a little bit more in terms of who has ownership over this. And this is part of where that accountability comes in that I talked about earlier. So in our case here, we're going to say that Dylan is the primary site collection admin. But we do want to make sure that we have some contacts available in terms of people that can receive email requests. So for example, we have this concept of a lease that allows this site collection to be used for a period of time. And once that lease is reaching its end of time, you would be notifying the contact here if they want to extend that lease, for example. So we'll say that Dylan is one of the contacts, and maybe just for fun, I'll throw my name in there as well. Okay, so again, designed to be very super user-friendly, very structured around what the governance policies are that this organization came up with. Lastly, what we're able to also do is embed a couple of, well, as many as you want really, property values that we need to place into the property bag for that particular site collection. So these are actually technically stored in the root web, the property bag of the root web in that site collection. But this is very useful from a reporting point of view, and this information can also be consumed from outside systems. Okay, so I'm getting short of time, so let me just real quickly put in some data here. We'll just say that is Dylan here. And I'm going to go ahead and save and submit this. This is going to kick off a workflow, and based on how this was defined, we're going to say that Dylan's manager is going to be the approver. He's the one that has to approve this particular site request. So once it's saved, we're going to go ahead and quickly log in as a new user and just take a moment to approve it, and then we'll confirm that that new provisioned site collection was ready to go. And just to point out that the same concept works for all the other types of requests, content moves, recoveries, etc. Okay, so that request has been submitted. Let's very quickly here log out and come back in as Dylan's manager. And this was actually defined, just to let you know, from the user profile store. So the user profile store knows that that this fellow is Dylan's manager, and so that's why we're logging in as him. So let's go ahead and take a look at the tasks this person has been assigned. You can see that Dylan's project is in fact listed on here. So let's just very, very quickly take that, mark it as approved, put in any comments, which of course all that information is logged. At that point, this is now an approved request. A timer job is actually running, kind of polling all of these, and will now be creating this particular site based on the definition that you had. In this case here, the actual site collection URL that we had configured earlier. Okay, so let's go ahead and quickly flip over into another window here. And actually, let's get the right window here. Not that one. There we go. Here's an earlier one that I created. Hopefully this is provisioned. It doesn't usually take very long. It's just a simple site collection. And sure enough, it was created already. So we're still signed in as Dylan. And hopefully we can see some things very quickly. If we go to the View All Site Content, you can actually see that this was just provisioned 1 minute ago. And there are a number of different things that we've kind of locked down in this area. As I just show you one last thing here. So for example, SharePoint Designer. Under this policy, we actually restricted SharePoint Designer. So you can see here that all of these SharePoint Designer features for the site collection are disabled at this point in time. And that's just one small way that you can enforce governance automation across the provisioning of a site collection. Again, this is just one of many different workloads that you publish within your catalog. Okay, well with that, let me go ahead and return back to slides, and we're going to bring our discussion to a close here. We do have some other resources that you're welcome to check out. I've got a short white paper that I've written, and we've got a more in-depth one that's going to be coming out. Doesn't talk so much about governance automation, but just governance in general. That'll hopefully be good input for you. And it's a good time to open up the floor for questions.
Great, thanks, Randy. I appreciate it. I know it was a lot to get through in a half hour, and I appreciate you doing it. My first question for you is, when we went through and looked at the governance automation interface there, how much of what we saw in the demo you walked through is kind of pre-configured out of the box versus how much configuration do you need to do to get kind of up and running with the governance automation tool?
Yeah, so absolutely great question. So yeah, for time's sake, we couldn't look at the sort of back-end configuration that's needed. It's not terribly complicated. It's just a matter of first understanding what the business requirements are and then creating what will become the policy definition. So policy definition would be something like, this is how I want to enable backups. This is how I want to manage archives. These are the kinds of things that I want to allow, let's say in terms of quotas and whether a SharePoint designer is going to be allowed. So you first create those policies, and there are interfaces to handle that, so you're not doing any of that through SharePoint. You then create the actual service catalog itself, which is really just a kind of a way of referencing all the policies, packaging it up into a nice kind of entry. So those things are done through the governance automation engine, and then all those talk to the underlying DocAv elements as well. So you do have to make sure that the policies and definitions are created. And once that's done, then you can do what I just walked you through now.
Great. The next question is, what version of DocAv do I need to use this governance automation tool?
Yeah, another great question. So to be able to take advantage of it, we do require that you're on at least version 6. Version 5 is our major release that was used for a number of years. But in version 6, we made a few strategic changes, in particular the adding of the API. So specifically, you actually need version 6.02 of DocAv to be able to use governance automation. And there are a couple of products in that suite that you do need to have as well. For example, the administrator suite is necessary for us to be able to do some of the permissions management capabilities.
Great. And I think this next question is directly related to that. So what are there other modules within DocAv 6 that are required for governance automation?
Okay, yeah, so good question. So it's really more of kind of whatever modules that you have in DocAv will just expose more capabilities through the governance automation interface. So for example, backup and restore is not a required module, but if you have that as an option, now I can specify more precise rules on how backups are going to be done. Are they going to be done daily or weekly? Will they be full backups or incremental backups? And then maybe, gosh, wouldn't it be nice if I could actually have users submit their own restore requests? So being able to have the backup and restore capability in DocAv will then expose new options and new service capabilities through the governance automation UI.
Gotcha. Last question, well, the last question on here as of right now is the governance automation tool a separate module in DocAv?
Yeah, so another good question. It is a separate tool. We do consider it part of the DocAv family of sorts, but I think maybe your question is more maybe of a licensing nature. It is a separately licensed product that you will have, and we're happy to discuss what those costs are offline. But yeah, so the investment is a few essential components in DocAv that will provide the platform, and then a separate license for governance automation then does sit on top of that.
Okay, great. Yeah, and if anybody has more questions on how it's licensed, how it fits in with DocAv and DocAv 6, SusQtech is a partner of AppPoint. We work closely with them. We're doing a number of things coming up. So my contact information, Randy has on the screen there, stevew@susqtech.com. You can email me, and we can get you some answers to any licensing questions you might have. In addition, one of the things that we're working on with AppPoint right now is putting together some training curriculum. We're going to do our first DocAv 6 training class in DC in November. It's going to be a public class held in DC, Northern Virginia, and that's going to cover the administration module within DogApp, and we envision other modules to come shortly thereafter. So just some of the things that we're working on in conjunction with our partners over there at AppPoint.
And we're happy we had you in that role. Thanks for your help, Steve.
Oh, no problem. And I think that'll do it. That is our last question that I see. Randy, again, thank you for your time. Appreciate it. I know it's a lot. When you talk about governance, it's a lot to cover in an hour, let alone a half hour. So appreciate you doing a good, thorough job on it, and hope to have you back on again soon.
You're welcome. Glad to be of service, guys. Take care, everyone.
Great. Thanks, Randy. Have a good one.
All right. Bye.